Lives Through Friends is something that's arisen as a piece of action research, really. It's not. Lives Through Friends happened in 2008 when an ex-colleague of mine and I got together after I'd retired for a couple of years because people kept asking for help. Local authorities, health authorities, families who essentially were concerned about what was happening to people who'd acquired very, very challenging or complex reputations. That's people with autism or learning disabilities, and ended up in ATUs or special hospitals, and of the Winterbourne type, I'm afraid, where there were repeatedly concerns about people's safety and abuse. So, Lives Through Friends grew out of that concern, but it actually is much more than that. On a day-to-day basis today, that's our core work, and I've moved from being operationally responsible for the organisation, I'm in my mid-70s now, to being the, if you like, the influencer and a bit of a consultant to the rest of the organisation. But we've brought together a team of very, very skilled and experienced people to work on these issues around how do we create ordinary lives, inclusive lives, lives worth living for that category of people. But because of what we learnt, and I'd learnt, and some of those colleagues as well had learnt over long periods of time, in my case 54 years in this business, because of what we'd learnt, we recognise that the way in which the system operates and the preoccupation with behaviour that is associated with that group of people actually doesn't do the job. Where we come from is the recognition that people actually become less challenging if they've got a life worth living, as well as there being service arrangements where clinically people know how to support people and how to avoid and diminish the incidence of challenging episodes. So, it's where we come from is also useful to the wider range of activity around social services, because we're very concerned about everybody having community, everybody having family, everybody having reciprocal relationships, and that being the basis of a good life. What we've learned is directly applicable to other areas of human activity, and we find ourselves working in other fields as well. This is 50 plus years of experience. My own personal experience hasn't just been in this field. I've been a youth and community worker. I've led social work teams. I've managed large elements of social services departments. I've managed large elements of health activity as well, particularly in the mental health and learning disability field. I've worked in the voluntary sector and led a national organisation for 16 years. So there's a whole gang of stuff that has come together, and that's just me. We have, if anybody wants to find out about Lives Through Friends, look at our website and you'll look at the number of directors we've got who've got similarly broad experience. People who've led social services departments, people who have been basically exponents of working with people with very challenging needs, people who've invented methods for working with challenging behaviour. People like Andy McDonnell who developed low arousal approaches. There's a whole gang of people within our network who bring practical experience which has also to some extent been researched. And if I take us back to our history, or my history was moving about 25, 30 years ago. It might even be longer than that now. During the 80s, my day-to-day experience was of closing long-stay institutions, the old, what were called mental handicap hospitals. And I found myself at the end of the 80s approached by the National Development Team when it was part of the Department of Health, because of the scandal at Borough Court and the Silent Minority programme on ITV. And I was part of the team then that did the inquiry for the Secretary of State, and eventually probably was a major contributor to the report that was published. And then, being naive as I was, I was asked to actually implement the report. In that process, the part of the report that we had put to the Secretary of State recommended that there was no way that the existing system, which was run by the NHS, was going to take apart the, if you like, the institutional norms that existed. And so we basically, and I think with some problems now, recommended that the responsibility should transfer to local authorities. That was incorporated into the 1991 NHS and Community Care Act and happened, but it coincided with us having to implement the closure of Borough Court and its associated bits and pieces, and led to inevitably a power interregnum, and we had to set up an independent organisation in order to do that commissioning job. In due course, we discovered that there were a very large number. It was over 100. It was 108 in total in terms of the records we kept. There were about 108 people who'd been so severely abused that they were very, very hard to live with. And we recognised at that point that there wasn't a service anywhere that was actually providing adequately for those people. And so for the next 15 years or so, the organisation changed from being a commissioning agency into a provider agency, or an interim provider agency, working out how to support those people to have not just a life outside of an abusive institution, but a real life, a life that was worth living, a life that was full of relationship, was full of opportunity to contribute, which is really, really important. So that's the starting point for me. We learnt all of that stuff, and we continue to learn, and it's a never-ending journey. And the crucial thing that we learnt was that everybody's different, and that there is no way that a set of service arrangements are ever going to meet anybody's needs to have a life.